A tech millionaire was forced into a marriage of gratitude with an ugly bride, but when the veil fell, he was stunned. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have one small request. Please click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will not miss our newest videos. It only takes a second, it is completely free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more heartfelt, meaningful stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Tell us your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. If you believe that love can rise from kindness and that power can learn compassion, this story is for you. Now, let us return to our main character. Rain draped itself over San Francisco like a silk curtain, soft but relentless. Beyond the glass of Grant Medical Tower, the skyline glowed in fractured silver, skyscrapers bending in the storm's reflection. Inside, everything was white, too clean, like the silence that follows loss. Machines whispered, heart monitors pulsed in steady rhythm, and standing among them, Lucas Grant, 35, the architect of a medical empire, watched the fragile rise and fall of his mother's chest. He had designed the machines that kept her alive, coded their precision down to the millisecond, yet could not program the warmth that once lived in her laughter. The doctors called it a miracle. But Lucas knew better. It was the girl, the volunteer nurse with eyes that looked like gentleness, had survived the world. Mara Ellis, 28. She had not only treated Valen Grant, she had given her own skin real, living graft to save the woman's life. No reward, no recognition, just a quiet request to remain unseen. Now she lived beneath a pale medical veil, protecting her healing skin from the light. People whispered the word disfigurement. But Valen Grant had called it something else, grace. When she finally opened her eyes, her voice trembled through the oxygen hiss. Lucas, promise me you will not let that girl fade into the shadows. She saved my life. She might still save yours. No. He wanted to argue, say that emotion had no place in logic, that gratitude did not require a vow. But when she reached for his hand, he saw the mother who once read him bedtime stories, under the hum of an old bedside lamp, and the walls around his heart cracked. Marry her, she whispered, tears trembling in her lashes. Kindness like hers is the only cure for what success has done to you. For the first time in years, Lucas could not say no. Weeks later, under the high marble arch of the hospital chapel, they stood facing each other. No flowers, no guests. Only the sound of rain echoing off the glass ceiling, like slow applause from heaven. He was dressed in black, impeccable, emotionless. She was wrapped in ivory, her face hidden beneath a soft, translucent veil. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. All I ask, she said quietly, is to keep caring for your mother. Oh. Lucas's tone was steady, the kind forged in boardrooms and sealed in contracts. 6 months. No obligations, no love. Their words met in the middle, his ice against her calm, and sealed the strangest of vows. That night, thunder rolled low over the bay, and lightning painted the penthouse windows in blue fire. Lucas stood before the glass wall, watching the city that carried his name shimmer beneath the rain. A kingdom of light, built on solitude. Behind him, Mara moved softly through the house. She placed 2 cups of tea on the table, one for Valen, one untouched near Lucas's chair. Chamomile and licorice root. The scent lingered long after she left the room. He told himself it was nothing. A transaction, a duty, a promise kept for a dying wish. But when he looked at the second cup, the steam still rising in the dimness, something unfamiliar stirred in his chest. A warmth he did not trust. A pulse that did not belong to science. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drowning the noise of the city until only the heartbeat of the machines remained. And beneath that hum, Lucas whispered to himself, 6 months, no love. But somewhere, in the quiet corners of that promise, love had already begun. If you believe that love and integrity still matter in a world chasing wealth, stay with us for the next chapter. Valen Stories, where power learns to love again. The morning after the quiet wedding, the rain had lifted, leaving San Francisco washed clean and colorless. From the glass walls of the Grant estate, the city glittered like 1,000 circuits alive, but soulless. Inside that house of steel and silence, Mara Ellis moved softly, almost like a shadow. The scent of chamomile lingered from the tea she brewed at dawn. She left one cup at Mrs. Evelyn Grant's bedside and another near the untouched seat in the study, the one where Lucas Grant spent his nights watching numbers on screens instead of stars in the sky. He entered the room without a sound, his presence filling it like a shift in air pressure. His suit was already pressed, his tie sharp, his expression unreadable. He glanced at the cup, then at her, his voice low and clipped. "You do not have to keep doing that." She looked up, her eyes steady behind the veil. "It is not an obligation, it is care." The word landed between them like something foreign. Lucas turned away, picking up a file. The motion was mechanical, practiced, like he had been avoiding human warmth for years. "This arrangement will be simple," he said. 6 months. You will stay here. My mother will believe this is real. You will have everything you need." He paused, then added quietly, "Except love." Mara nodded once. "That is not what I came for." Her calm unsettled him. He had expected tears or gratitude, not serenity. She moved toward the door, but stopped when his mother's voice drifted from down the hall. "Lucas? Sweetheart?" For a second, his expression softened. The sound of his mother's frail voice was the one thing that could pierce his armor. He stepped aside, letting Mara pass first. She entered the room, greeting the older woman with warmth so natural that even Lucas hesitated at the doorway. Evelyn smiled weakly. "You are glowing, dear. Are you settling in?" Mara nodded gently. "You have made it easy to feel at home." Lucas stood in silence, watching as his mother's hand rested on Mara's. The sight did something he could not name, an ache somewhere between admiration and fear. Later that day, when Evelyn fell asleep, Lucas retreated to his office. Floor-to-ceiling screens flickered around him, full of market graphs and data projections. But behind the glass reflection, he could still see the image of Mara's hands folding the blanket across his mother's legs. For the first time in years, the numbers looked meaningless. That evening, the housekeeper arrived with groceries and news. "Sir," Miss Vale called again, she said carefully. "She insists it is urgent." Lucas' jaw tightened. Sienna Vale. Brilliant, beautiful, ambitious. His former business partner, and for a brief time, something almost more. She had wanted both him and the empire he built, but never the man beneath it. "Tell her I am unavailable," he said. But his mother, awake in her chair, heard the name and smiled faintly. "She was always lovely, that Sienna girl," she murmured. Then, turning to Mara, she added softly, "But you, my dear, have something money cannot buy. Peace." Mara lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond. Lucas turned away before his mother could see the faint flicker in his face. Night fell quietly over the estate. Mara moved through the corridors, checking on the older woman, folding linens, tidying the small library where Evelyn liked to read. In the far corner of the room, an old record player waited. She brushed her fingers across the dust and set the needle down. Soft piano filled the space, warm, human, imperfect. Lucas appeared at the door, drawn by the sound. "You found my father's records," he said quietly. Mara smiled beneath the veil. She misses him. The music helps her sleep. He watched her in the lamplight, the pale fabric of her veil glowing gold against the melody. Something about the scene felt unfamiliar. The air in his house was finally alive. "You could stay in the guest suite near my mother," he said after a moment. "It is easier if she needs something at night." Mara nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Grant." He hesitated, then added, "Lucas is fine." The name sounded strange on her tongue when she repeated it softly. "Lucas. Oh." For a second, he almost smiled. When she left the room, he remained there, listening as the music faded. For years, his house had been nothing but glass and silence. Now, somewhere down the hall, he could hear footsteps that sounded like home. That night, Mara stood on the balcony outside her new room, the city lights flickering beneath her like stars that had fallen. She whispered into the wind, 6 months, no love. But her voice carried a trace of something the contract could not name. Hope. And inside his study, Lucas stared at the second cup of tea, still warm, untouched, waiting. Sometimes, love does not enter through grand gestures or perfect moments. It slips quietly into the places where loneliness once lived. The weeks that followed unfolded in quiet precision, like the measured ticking of a clock in a museum, beautiful, distant, and cold. The Grant estate breathed in patterns of silence. Every sound echoed too clearly. The soft click of glass doors, the whisper of slippers on marble floors, the faint clink of porcelain when Mara Ellis poured tea. She kept her promises with almost sacred discipline. Every dawn, she brewed the same herbal blend. Every dusk, she read softly to Mrs. Evelyn Grant until the woman drifted into fragile sleep, and when she was not at the bedside, she disappeared into the garden, tending to the jasmine as though the world outside could still be gentle. To Lucas Grant, her calm was unnerving. He had built companies, networks, machines that bent to his will, but he could not read this woman. One morning, on his way to the study, he stopped at the sound of her voice coming from the balcony. She was speaking on the phone, low and steady, the wind threading through her words. "Yes, the transfer will go through this week. Make sure the children at Street Mary's get the equipment first." Lucas stood still. He did not mean to listen, but something in her tone purpose without pride caught him. He had spent years surrounded by people who traded kindness for advantage. And here was someone giving away the little she had left, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That night, during dinner, his mother mentioned the call with a proud smile. "Lucas, did you know Mara helps fund a children's foundation? She refuses to use our name." Mara's spoon paused midair. "Mrs. Grant, please." But Evelyn continued, her eyes soft. She said kindness means more when no one sees it. Lucas looked at Mara across the table. The lamplight shimmered against the veil that framed her face. She met his gaze for a second, calm as water, then lowered her eyes. "It is not my money," she said quietly. "It is your mother's gift, passed forward. Then she stood, excused herself, and left behind a silence that lingered long after the door closed. Lucas found himself staring at the teacup she had left behind, steam curling upward, fading into the dim light. Something moved inside him, not affection, not yet. Just a small ache, unfamiliar and uninvited. Days later, Sienna Vale returned from New York like a gust of polished ambition. The city's magazines had already crowned her the visionary woman behind Neurocin's rise. At the company's launch gala, she shimmered beneath the chandeliers, her silver gown catching every camera flash like it was built from envy itself. When she saw Lucas, her smile curved with confidence. "So, the rumors were true," she said lightly. "Marriage looks good on you." He gave the smallest nod. "It was my mother's wish." Her gaze sharpened. "A convenient one, I suppose. But Lucas, a man like you should never let sympathy become charity." Before he could respond, the press closed in microphones, cameras, noise, and by morning, headlines screamed, "Tech Titan's hidden bride, the mystery behind the veil." Back at the estate, Mara sat beside Evelyn, feeding her soup as sunlight spilled through the tall windows. When the older woman caught her glancing at her phone, she shook her head gently. "Do not read it, dear. The world does not always know what goodness looks like." Mara smiled faintly. "It does not matter. I am used to misunderstanding." But her hands trembled slightly as she folded the napkin. She had entered this marriage for one reason, to secure funds for the children. Her small foundation could no longer save. If the world chose to mock her, she could bear it. The children were worth the price. That evening, Lucas came home late. He found her outside, watering the jasmine, the sky bruised with sunset. Her veil caught the dying light, glowing softly around her like mist. He hesitated before speaking. "You should not let the media get to you." She turned, her voice quiet but steady. "I do not. Pain is easier to carry when you know why you are carrying it." The simplicity of her words disarmed him. He had faced boardrooms filled with predators, negotiated with governments, survived betrayal, yet one woman's calm could unravel him. The next morning, there was a cup of tea already waiting on the table when she entered the kitchen. Steam curled lazily upward from its rim. He was standing by the counter, reading something on his tablet, his voice low. "You forgot yours last night?" She looked at him for a moment, long enough to see the hesitation in his eyes, then nodded once in thanks. For the first time, the space between them did not feel cold. That night, Lucas lay awake in his study. Rain pressed softly against the glass walls, blurring the city into streaks of gold. He thought about the tea, about the sound of her voice in the garden, about the way his mother's hands seemed steadier when Mara was near. It was absurd, he told himself. He barely knew her. She was part of an agreement, nothing more. Yet something inside him had shifted. He no longer looked forward to silence the way he used to. And as he stared at the ceiling, the thought came uninvited. Why does it matter to me if she smiles? Or does not? He exhaled sharply, frustrated by the question, by himself. Whatever this was, it was temporary, irrelevant, impossible. Still, long after midnight, the scent of chamomile seemed to linger in the air. Morning light spilled through the high windows of the Grant estate, painting the marble floors in gentle gold. Life inside the house had found its quiet rhythm again. Every morning, Mara brewed tea for Valen. Every evening, she tended to the orchids in the conservatory, the same ones that had refused to bloom for years. Outside the gates, rumors still circled like vultures. They said the wife of Lucas Grant was terribly disfigured, that the tech millionaire had married her only out of guilt and gratitude. Lucas had read one article, then shut his laptop. He did not care what the world believed. All he knew was that her presence steadied his home like air returning to a room that had forgotten how to breathe. She moved quietly, always veiled, always measured. Sometimes he caught a glimpse of her profile when sunlight slipped through the lace, just the soft line of her cheek, the curve of her jaw. He wondered if the stories were true, but each time he looked longer, the thought dissolved. Whatever she hid, it no longer mattered. Her kindness had its own light, and that was enough. That afternoon, he found her in the conservatory, kneeling among the orchids. She wore simple linen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, fingers covered in soil. The glass ceiling glowed above her like warm rainlight, and for a brief moment, Lucas forgot to breathe. He leaned against the doorframe, watching as she trimmed a broken stem and murmured softly, "You do not throw it away, you give it time." Something about that line stayed with him all day. Night came with thunder over the bay. The air felt heavier, charged. He was working in his study when the power cut out lights, screens, everything. A sharp click, then silence. The storm outside swallowed the city's hum. He stepped into the hallway and saw a faint flicker of light ahead. Mara was carrying a single candle down the corridor. Its glow haloed her veil in amber and gold. For a moment, the sight stopped him, the soft flame reflected in her eyes, the way she moved, calm and unafraid. "The backup generator will come on soon," he said. She turned, the light trembling between them. "Then let us enjoy the dark while we have it." He almost smiled. He had never thought of darkness as something to enjoy. When the power returned, the world looked harsher, too bright, too loud. But something in him refused to reset with the lights. Near midnight, Evelyn's fever rose suddenly. The nurses were gone for the night, so Mara took over without hesitation. Lucas heard the commotion and hurried to the door. He stopped when he saw her bending over his mother, wiping her forehead, whispering softly, a lullaby too faint to have words. Her veil had fallen to her shoulders. Strands of hair clung to her cheeks. The lamplight painted her face in golden shadow. He could see now the faint marks of healed burns near her temple, the lines the world had called ugly. But there was nothing ugly about it. It was a map of courage, a quiet testament to everything she had given. She dipped a cloth into cool water, wrung it out, and pressed it gently against Evelyn's brow. Her voice trembled as she sang raw, human, endlessly tender. Lucas stood motionless in the doorway. He had seen people save lives in operating rooms and laboratories, but never with hands that shook from love. Something broke open in his chest. He reached for the doorframe, steadying himself. And then the first tear fell uninvited, unstoppable. He had not cried since his father's funeral. It was not pity, it was awe. Because in that single moment, he realized he was watching the rarest form of beauty. A heart that gave everything and asked for nothing. He stayed there until the fever eased, until his mother's breathing steadied and the house fell back into silence. When he finally turned away, the world outside the window had begun to pale with dawn. He walked down the corridor, the scent of chamomile and rain following him. He did not understand what was happening to him, only that he could no longer look at her and pretend he felt nothing. That night, a wall built over decades had cracked open, and through that crack, light was beginning to pour. Morning came late to the Grant estate, heavy with the scent of rain that never quite left the air. The house was too still, too polite in its quiet, as if waiting for something to fall apart. Mara moved as usual, calm and precise. Tea for Valen. Medicine. A soft hum as she checked the orchids. Lucas watched her from the study door, wanting to say something, anything, but words felt too fragile in his mouth. The night of the fever still lived in his mind, the lullaby, the warmth in her hands, the way her face had looked beneath the lamplight. Since that night, he had not been able to look at her without feeling the weight of it. And then, like all fragile things, peace broke quietly. That afternoon, Sienna Vale arrived at his office. Her perfume hit the air before her words did, sweet, expensive, calculated. She placed a single folder on his desk. "I thought you should see this, Lucas." Oh. Inside was a set of printouts, bank transactions, transfers, signatures, all perfectly aligned. The account name at the top, Mrs. Lucas Grant. Money moved from the company's charity funds into what appeared to be Mara's personal account. Lucas read in silence. Every line made sense, every number balanced. It looked undeniable. Sienna's voice was low, deliberate. "I warned you she was not what she seemed. I am sorry." She left the office before he could speak. The folder remained, a ghost on the table. By the time he returned home, the city had gone gray. He found Mara in the conservatory, misting the orchids. She looked peaceful, unaware that her whole world was about to tilt. He held the folder at his side, his throat tight. "There are transactions under your name," he said at last. "Company accounts." She turned slowly, eyes calm but steady. "I do not have any company accounts, Lucas." He opened the folder, laid it between them. "Then explain this." She scanned the pages swift, one glance each, then looked up at him, expression unreadable. "You think I would steal from you?" His voice faltered. "It is not what I think. It is what I see." For the first time since she had entered his house, her stillness cracked. "What you see is a lie, and yet it is easier for you to believe it than to believe me." The words struck him like glass. He wanted to protest, but she had already stepped back. She removed her gloves, her wedding band, and placed them neatly on the marble counter. "Your mother believed in me. I wish you could have done the same." Then she turned and walked toward the hall. The sound of her footsteps was light, final. Lucas did not stop her. He told himself he needed time, proof, space to think. But when the front door closed, something inside him tore like fabric. That night, the house was wrong. The light too white, the silence too sharp. He wandered through the rooms like a man lost in his own reflection. Her cup was still on the kitchen counter, a faint ring of tea dried at the rim. Her scarf hung by the piano, soft as breath. Every trace of her presence screamed louder than her absence. Evelyn woke and found him in the hallway, eyes hollow. "She is gone, is she not?" He nodded once. "Then perhaps you should ask yourself why you let her leave." He could not answer. Later, he sat in his study, the false documents spread across the desk, the numbers blurred. Logic, once his refuge, felt like betrayal. He thought of the night she sang to his mother, of her trembling hands in the candlelight, of the way she never asked for anything, not even understanding. He pressed his palms against his eyes, breath shaking. He wanted to believe her. He already did. But the wound of doubt was deep, and pride made it fester. Outside, the rain started again. The city flickered through the glass, distorted and unreal. He whispered to himself, "I know she is good. I know it. Then why does this hurt like she is guilty?" No one answered. By dawn, the house still smelled faintly of her. He stood in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids she had nursed back to life. One petal had fallen onto the soil, white, delicate, unbroken. He picked it up, turning it in his hand until it trembled. For the first time, Lucas Grant, the man who could rebuild anything, had no idea how to fix what mattered most. And as sunlight touched the empty chair she used to sit in, he realized the cruelest part of love. You can doubt someone's innocence, but not stop loving them for it. The next morning arrived gray and hollow. Lucas woke to silence thick enough to hear the clock tick through the walls. The air in the estate had changed. It carried no warmth, no scent of chamomile, no sound of gentle footsteps moving from room to room. Her absence was not noise. It was gravity. He tried to bury himself in work. Numbers filled the screens before him, charts, forecasts, projections, but nothing held. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted to the chair across from his desk, where she used to leave the morning tea. It was empty now, a small wound that refused to close. Outside, reporters gathered at the gates. The false story had escaped the walls of the company and taken flight. Words like times fraud, times and times charity theft, times now circled with the same cruelty that once called Mara times the ugly bride. Asterisk. The world loved to devour what it could not understand. Lucas said nothing to the press. He had not even said anything to himself. Sienna visited again. She arrived uninvited, wearing victory like perfume. "It is better this way," she murmured. "You can focus again." He did not answer. He watched her reflection in the glass and thought of how easily people spoke of love when they meant ownership. When she left, he deleted her number and every message she had ever sent. Days passed. The house kept running on routine nurses, deliveries, quiet meals, but the rhythm felt mechanical, as if life had been replaced with habit. At night, Lucas found himself walking into the conservatory. The orchids were still blooming, though the soil had begun to dry. He watered them without skill, his movements clumsy, careful. In the reflection of the glass, his face looked older, lonelier. He wondered where she had gone. Part of him wanted to find her, to tell her he believed her, to ask for forgiveness before pride sealed the door again. Another part, the one trained by years of logic, told him to stay still, to wait for proof, to not risk more hurt. The fight between those two halves was quiet, but constant. One evening, a letter arrived. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, small, neat, deliberate. Inside was a single line. "Mirk, your mother deserves peace. So do you." No accusation, no explanation, just grace, even in leaving. He held the letter until the paper wrinkled in his hand. Then he placed it on the piano beside the scarf she had forgotten. For a long time, he stood there, staring at the two relics of a woman the world had misjudged and he had failed to defend. The next day, the board summoned him. They demanded statements, accountability, public distance from the woman in question. Lucas listened, nodded, and agreed to everything. Outwardly, he was the same composed man he had always been. Inside, he was split in two, one part moving, the other frozen in that night outside his mother's door, watching a woman he was supposed to forget and finding it impossible. When he returned home, his mother was asleep. He sat beside her, listening to the slow rhythm of her breath. For the first time, he realized what Mara had given them was not care, it was devotion, and he had repaid it with suspicion. He walked out into the garden. Evening wind brushed the surface of the pond, scattering the reflection of the lights above. He looked toward the horizon, where the city glowed like a lie pretending to be truth. He whispered, almost to the night itself, "You could have told me who you really were." Then, softer, "Or maybe I should have already known." The rain began again, thin, relentless, the kind that could last for days. He stayed there, letting it soak through his shirt, through every layer of certainty he had worn like armor. He wanted to believe he could still fix it, but faith without her presence felt like air without oxygen. When he finally went inside, the orchids in the conservatory caught his eye. One of them had begun to wilt. He reached to touch the stem, then stopped, afraid that even his hands would make things worse. He stood there in the silence she had left behind, realizing that love was not the opposite of logic, it was the proof logic could never build. Rain returned the next morning, a thin curtain falling across the city skyline. The storm had been quiet at first, but it carried weight, the kind that made the air hum and the walls remember sound. Lucas stood by the window, watching the blurred reflection of himself against the glass. Days had passed since Mara left, yet her absence had the shape of a person. It followed him from room to room like an echo he could not silence. He went to the company that day, out of habit, not purpose. The board wanted updates on the investigation surrounding the forged transactions. Lucas had demanded a forensic review of every digital trail, every signature, every timestamp. The results were not what he expected. A financial analyst entered the conference room with trembling hands. "There is something you should see, sir," he said. He displayed two images side by side, the signature from the forged account and the real one from Mara's personal records. Even to an untrained eye, the difference was clear. The handwriting was similar, but not identical. The fake account had been created under the alias Mrs. Lucas Grant, from a temporary office address registered by Sienna Vale. Lucas's breath stalled. His mind processed details faster than emotion could follow. Dates, codes, access logs, all pointed to one person. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he closed the file, his voice low and steady. "Seal this report. No one outside this room sees it." He left the building before anyone could stop him. By the time he reached the estate, the rain had turned to fog. His mother was resting, the orchids drooping in the humid air. He sat by her bed and held her hand gently, whispering, "I was wrong." Evelyn opened her eyes, tired but alive. "Then make it right," she said. That night, he drove. The car cut through the mist along the Bay Bridge, lights flashing off the wet pavement. He did not know where she was. He only remembered the last address she had mentioned, a community shelter she supported near the children's hospital. When he arrived, the place was small, tucked between an old church and a laundromat. Inside, laughter echoed from a handful of children playing with paper cranes. And there she was. Mara knelt beside them, veil replaced by a soft headscarf, her face turned slightly away. Even from a distance, he saw the faint scar that curved along her temple, disappearing into her hair. The mark the world had called ugly looked almost luminous in the soft light. She did not see him at first. He stood in the doorway, hands trembling slightly, heart trying to catch up with what his mind already knew. Every word he had spoken against her replayed like a storm he could not shut off. When she finally looked up, the room seemed to still. Her expression did not change, no anger, no surprise, only calm, as if she had already forgiven him long before he arrived. "I found out the truth," he said quietly. "I know," she answered. "It always comes eventually." He stepped closer, the sound of children fading behind him. "Sienna forged everything, the account, the documents. I should have known." Mara shook her head gently. "You could not have known. People believe what fear tells them to believe." He searched her face for resentment and found none. Only exhaustion and something that looked like peace. "You should come home," he said. "My mother misses you." She hesitated. "Does her son?" The question lingered between them, soft but heavy. He wanted to answer, but truth tangled in his throat. "Instead," he said, "you do not belong in a shelter, Mara." Her smile was faint. "And you do not belong in a cage of doubt." She turned back to the children, her fingers folding another paper crane. "They need me here," she said softly. "They are the reason I can still believe good things survive lies." He wanted to say more, to reach for her, to bridge the space his pride had built. But before he could, a volunteer called her name. She excused herself and disappeared into the back room. Lucas remained standing in the doorway, the scent of rain and chalk dust filling the air. He felt the ache of something too large to contain love, regret, a longing to start again. As he walked back into the night, he saw her through the window helping a child tie a shoelace, her laughter spilling out like sunlight through fog. For the first time, he understood what love truly looked like. Not grand, not flawless, but steady, healing, undeserved. He whispered into the wind, "I will make it right." And as he drove away, the rain softened. Somewhere behind him, in a small shelter full of paper cranes, a woman he once doubted was teaching broken things how to fly again. The rain that night felt softer, as if the world itself wanted to apologize. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, and Lucas drove through the quiet streets toward the shelter, his hands tight on the wheel. The truth had come out: Sienna's lies, the forged account, the betrayal that nearly destroyed Mara's name. He had spoken in public, but his apology to the world meant nothing until he could face the only person who mattered. When he reached the shelter, children's laughter drifted through an open window, mixed with the faint scent of soap and fresh bread. Inside, volunteers moved between tables, folding blankets, sorting boxes. And there, near the far wall, stood Mara. She was helping a little girl tie her shoes, her head slightly bowed, her voice soft and patient. For a moment, Lucas simply watched, frozen in the doorway, afraid that if he moved, she might vanish again. The overhead light caught the edge of her veil as she lifted her head, and then it slipped. He saw her face for the first time. It was not the face the world had whispered about. It was far more beautiful, so real it startled him. Her skin glowed faintly under the light, her features delicate, yet strong. A small scar curved along her temple, thin and pale, like the memory of fire. Instead of marring her, it made her luminous, as if the mark itself had been touched by mercy. Lucas felt something tighten in his chest, a reverence so sharp it hurt. He had imagined this moment 100 times, and yet nothing could have prepared him for the truth of her. Beauty, he realized, was not perfection. It was courage made visible. When she finally noticed him, she did not flinch or cover her face. She simply looked at him steady, quiet, waiting. He stepped closer, his voice low and careful. "It is over now. The lies, the accusations, they have all fallen apart." Mara said nothing. Her eyes stayed on him, calm but unreadable. He wanted to speak more, to pour out the guilt, the shame, the longing, but every word felt too small for what filled him. He reached into his coat and held out a folded paper, the printed evidence that cleared her name. It trembled slightly in his hand. "You were right about everything. I should have trusted you, and I did not. I do not know how to undo that." She took the paper, barely glancing at it before setting it aside. "You cannot undo it," she said softly. "You can only become someone who would not do it again." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing through the ache that came with truth. When he opened them, she was still watching him, gentle but unyielding. In her gaze, he saw everything she had endured, the public shame, the doubt, the silence. And still, she stood with grace. It humbled him in ways apology never could. He wanted to reach for her, but he did not. He knew she did not need rescue she never had. What she needed was respect, faith, and time. Around them, the shelter hummed quietly, the soft murmur of children, the clatter of dishes, the sound of an ordinary life built from extraordinary kindness. Lucas had built empires, but this small place, filled with laughter and light, felt like the only thing that had ever been real. He finally spoke, his words barely a whisper. "You have every right to walk away, Mara, but if there is anything left to rebuild, I will spend the rest of my life building it right." She did not reply. Instead, she looked past him to the open door, where rain still fell in silver threads. The sound of it filled the space between them. Then she turned back to him, her expression softer now, her eyes glimmering with something almost tender. "The children will be planting new flowers tomorrow," she said quietly. "Come early. They could use another pair of hands." It was not forgiveness. Not yet. But it was not goodbye, either. He nodded, unable to speak, his heart beating in rhythm with the rain outside. As he left the shelter, he looked back once more. Through the doorway, he saw her kneeling again beside the children, the faint light outlining her face. The scar on her temple caught the glow and turned to silver, like a crown of quiet strength. And for the first time, Lucas Grant understood what love truly looked like. It was not about perfection. It was about seeing someone's wounds and still finding beauty there. That night, the city slept beneath the soft rhythm of rain, and somewhere inside it, a man who once lived by logic finally learned how to feel. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the shelter windows, turning the rain-soaked world into something clean again. The children ran barefoot across the garden, laughing as they planted the small flowers Mara had promised them. Lucas stood among them, his hands muddy, his sleeves rolled. For once, he did not look like a man who owned half the city. He looked like someone learning how to live. Mara watched him quietly from the porch. The way he listened to the children, the way he smiled without realizing something inside her shifted. The anger that once lived in her chest had softened into something gentler, something that felt dangerously close to hope. When the children ran off to chase butterflies, she walked toward him. The sun caught her veil where it hung loose around her shoulders, and for a heartbeat, he saw her face fully again, the scar along her temple, the curve of her lips, the light in her eyes. It stole his breath. He wiped his hands on his shirt, nervous for the first time in years. "You said I could help," he said softly, "but I think you are the one fixing me." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we are both learning." "Oh." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and took out the small orchid he had brought, one of the same flowers she had once nurtured in his mother's conservatory. "It finally bloomed," he whispered. "I thought it belonged here with you." Her fingers brushed his as she took it, a small, electric touch that made the world go quiet. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the wind, the laughter of children far away, and the soft rustle of petals between them. He stepped closer, his voice low, steady. "Mara, I spent half my life building walls, and you walked through every one of them without breaking anything. You gave more love to the world than I ever thought existed, and still, Somehow you gave it to me." Her eyes lifted to meet his. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I finally understand," he said. "Love is not about deserving. It is about seeing someone's truth and staying anyway." "Oh." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing the faint scar along her temple, a mark that, to him now, looked like grace itself. His next words came quietly, certain, and trembling, all at once. "I love you." Mara closed her eyes, a single tear tracing her cheek, not from sadness, but release. When she opened them again, she whispered, "Then love me honestly. No more fear, no more doubt." He nodded, and before words could fail them again, he leaned forward. The kiss was slow, reverent, two people, forgiving the past and claiming the moment. Around them, the air seemed to hold its breath. The scent of orchids, the hum of sunlight, the sound of life beginning again. When they finally parted, she smiled against his lips and whispered, "Welcome home." And for the first time, Lucas Grant felt what it meant to truly belong. If you believe that love and integrity still hold their worth in a world chasing wealth, follow Valen Stories to hear the most beautiful tales we are about to tell.